I used to believe that protecting someone you cared about was always the right thing to do. I believed silence could be an act of love, that carrying another person's burden could somehow make life easier for both of us. Looking back now, I know how dangerously wrong I was. The truth has a strange way of surviving. It waits quietly in forgotten conversations, unopened letters, lingering glances, and ordinary moments until the day it decides to step into the light. When that day finally arrived, everything I thought I was saving fell apart, and the only thing left standing was the bond neither of us had ever been brave enough to name. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how hiding one man's truth completely changed my own life. 3 years earlier, my life looked exactly the way everyone expected it to. I worked as a compliance analyst for a respected financial consulting company in downtown Chicago. Every weekday followed the same comfortable rhythm. I arrived before 8 in the morning, greeted the security guard by name, bought coffee from the cafe across the street, and spent the next 10 hours reviewing reports that most people never wanted to read. It was predictable, quiet, and safe. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. The first time I met Noah Brooks, he almost walked directly into me while carrying a stack of archived client files that blocked his entire view. Papers scattered across the polished hallway floor like oversized snowflakes. He looked horrified, immediately dropping to one knee to collect every page before anyone noticed. I laughed softly and knelt beside him without saying a word. Together we gathered every document before another employee even reached the hallway. When we finally stood, he looked embarrassed enough to apologize 3 different times. "I promise I am usually less of a disaster," he said with a nervous smile. I smiled back. I have had worse mornings. That simple exchange should have been the end of it. Instead, it quietly became the beginning of everything. Noah had joined our department only a few weeks earlier after transferring from the company's Denver office. He was intelligent without trying to impress anyone. He remembered everyone's names after meeting them once. He stayed late to help coworkers, even when the work had nothing to do with him. He laughed with his whole face instead of only his mouth. It was impossible not to notice him. Before long, our lunch breaks started overlapping almost by accident. We discovered we both preferred small bookstores over crowded shopping malls. We both loved old black and white movies that most people our age had never watched. We even argued playfully about whether rainy weekends were better spent reading or taking long walks along Lake Michigan. Those ordinary conversations slowly became the part of every day I anticipated most. Months passed before I realized how carefully Noah measured every word whenever conversations drifted toward relationships or family. While our coworkers casually talked about dating, engagements, anniversaries, or holiday plans, Noah always redirected attention back toward work or travel. At first, I assumed he was simply private. Many people were. But privacy and fear are 2 different things, and eventually I learned to recognize the difference in the way his smile disappeared whenever certain questions entered the room. One chilly November evening, we stayed late preparing documents for an important client presentation scheduled the following morning. By the time we finished, the office floor was almost empty. Snow drifted outside the massive windows overlooking the city. I offered to walk him to the train station since it was already dark. He hesitated before quietly accepting. We barely spoke during the first few blocks. The silence felt comfortable until Noah unexpectedly stopped beside the Riverwalk railing. He stared at the black water below before speaking so quietly I almost missed the words. "Do you ever feel like you spend your entire life pretending to be someone that everyone else expects?" The question caught me completely off guard. I searched for the right answer, but found only honesty. "Sometimes." He nodded without looking at me. "I've been pretending for so long that I am afraid I would not recognize myself anymore if I stopped." I wanted to ask what he meant. Instead, I waited. Eventually, he turned toward me with tired eyes that carried years of exhaustion no 26-year-old should have known. "There is something about me almost nobody at work knows," he admitted. "Back home, people found out once. It did not end well. Starting over here seemed easier than explaining myself again. My heart understood the truth before he actually spoke it. "I am gay," he whispered. The words were almost carried away by the cold wind before reaching me. I simply nodded. Nothing about him changed in that moment. He was still the same thoughtful man who laughed over coffee, rescued abandoned books from discount shelves, and apologized too often for things that needed no apology. The only difference was that he had finally trusted someone enough to stop pretending. "Thank you for telling me," I answered quietly. Relief spread across his face so gently that it almost looked painful. Neither of us realized that someone else had been standing only a short distance away that evening, hidden beneath the station awning, close enough to recognize our voices but too far away for us to notice. That unnoticed witness would unknowingly become the first crack in the fragile secret Noah had finally dared to share. And from that single moment forward, both of our lives began moving toward a future neither of us could possibly imagine. I barely slept after that conversation. It was not because Noah had trusted me with his secret. It was because I could still see the relief in his eyes after finally saying the words aloud. Everyone deserves at least one place where they do not have to pretend. And somehow, I had become that place for him. The next morning, neither of us mentioned what had happened beside the river. We greeted each other the same way we always had, shared coffee before the morning meeting, and joked about how our manager somehow managed to schedule every important presentation before 9 o'clock. Nothing appeared different, yet everything quietly had changed. Our friendship became deeper without becoming louder. Noah no longer hesitated before inviting me to lunch or asking whether I wanted to spend Saturday exploring another independent bookstore somewhere outside the city. I noticed little things that I had overlooked before. He laughed more often. His shoulders seemed less tense whenever we were alone. Sometimes he would tell me stories about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. He spoke warmly about his mother, who still called every Sunday afternoon, but carefully avoided talking about his father. Whenever that subject came close, he gently changed directions, and I respected the boundary without asking questions. Winter slowly settled across Chicago. Snow-covered sidewalks almost every week, and holiday decorations filled every office lobby downtown. Our department organized its annual charity event before Christmas, encouraging everyone to bring family members or close friends. The invitations quickly became the most common topic around the office. People compared dinner plans, discussed travel schedules, and debated whose homemade desserts would disappear first. Noah quietly listened while pretending to focus on spreadsheets. I could tell he was already searching for an excuse not to attend. During lunch one afternoon, I asked him directly, "Are you skipping the party?" He smiled weakly. "Probably. Large gatherings are not really my thing." I knew that answer was only half true, or maybe pretending is exhausting. He looked at me for several long seconds before giving a tiny nod. Sometimes I forget how easy it is for other people. I understood exactly what he meant without needing another explanation. A few days later, our manager unexpectedly stopped by my desk. "Ethan, I have a favor to ask. Noah seems uncomfortable about the holiday event. Would you mind convincing him to come? Everyone likes him, and I think it would help him feel like part of the team." I agreed without thinking much about it. That afternoon, I found Noah reviewing reports in one of the conference rooms. "Come to the party," I said casually. "You do not even have to stay long." He laughed softly. "You are surprisingly persistent, only because I think you deserve one normal evening." He looked down at the folder in front of him. Normal is a complicated word. I smiled. "Then let us settle for pleasant." After a long pause, he finally agreed. The evening arrived with fresh snow covering the streets. The hotel ballroom overlooked the Chicago River, glowing with warm lights reflected across the water. Coworkers introduced spouses, partners, parents, and children while holiday music quietly played in the background. Noah seemed nervous the moment we walked inside, instinctively staying close enough that our shoulders almost touched whenever conversations became crowded. We spent most of the evening talking with coworkers, sampling desserts, and laughing at harmless office stories. For the first time since I had known him, Noah genuinely looked relaxed in a room full of people. Then everything shifted in a matter of seconds. Near the entrance, a voice loudly called Noah's name. He froze before turning around. Walking toward us was Daniel Mercer, a senior consultant who had recently transferred from the Denver office. I noticed Noah's face lose all color before Daniel even reached us. Daniel smiled politely, but there was unmistakable surprise in his eyes. "Noah Brooks," he said. "I never expected to see you here." Noah forced a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "It has been a while." They exchanged a few ordinary sentences about work before Daniel glanced briefly toward me. "Good to know you found a fresh start," he remarked with a strange emphasis that only Noah seemed to understand. After Daniel walked away, Noah remained completely silent. I gently asked whether he was all right. He answered too quickly. Yes. It was the kind of answer people give when they desperately hope nobody asks a second question. We left earlier than planned. Outside, snowflakes drifted beneath the streetlights while traffic moved slowly across the bridge. Noah finally spoke once we reached the parking garage. "Daniel knows." I looked at him without interrupting. He worked in Denver when everything happened. His voice trembled despite every effort to remain calm. "He never treated me badly, but he knows why I left. If he says anything here," he never finished the sentence. He did not have to. I understood exactly what he feared. Rumors travel faster than facts, especially inside large companies where curiosity often disguises itself as concern. Without thinking, I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then nobody hears it from anyone else." Noah stared at me, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" "I mean your life belongs to you. If anyone asks questions, they answer to me first." He shook his head. "You should not have to carry that." "Maybe not," I replied quietly, "but I choose to." Neither of us realized that choice would soon be tested far sooner than either of us expected, because before the following week was over, the first rumors had already begun quietly circulating through the office, and someone was determined to learn whether they were true. Rumors never arrive with names attached. They begin as whispers in break rooms, unfinished sentences in elevators, or curious glances that last 1 second too long. During the first few days after the holiday party, nothing obvious happened. If anything, everyone behaved exactly as they always had. But I noticed the small changes because I had started paying attention. Conversations paused for a fraction of a second when Noah entered the room. A few coworkers exchanged quiet looks after he walked away. Someone stopped asking him personal questions altogether, while another suddenly became unusually friendly. None of it proved anything on its own, yet together it formed a pattern that neither of us could ignore. Noah pretended not to notice. Every morning he smiled politely, completed his assignments ahead of schedule, and volunteered to help anyone who needed assistance. From the outside, he looked exactly like the dependable employee everyone respected. Only I could see the growing tension hidden beneath that calm surface. His coffee often grew cold before he remembered to drink it. He stared at his computer screen longer than necessary before beginning simple tasks. Sometimes he caught himself glancing toward the office entrance whenever someone unfamiliar walked onto our floor. One afternoon, while reviewing financial reports together in a conference room, I finally asked the question that had been sitting between us all week. "Has Daniel spoken to you since the party?" Noah slowly shook his head. "No." "Do you think he started the rumors?" He leaned back in his chair before answering. "I honestly do not know. Back in Denver, he was never cruel. He mostly stayed out of everyone's personal business. But sometimes people reveal things without realizing the consequences. They tell one trusted friend, who tells another, and suddenly something private belongs to everyone." I understood exactly what he meant. Secrets rarely explode. They spread quietly until nobody remembers where they began. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a message from Human Resources requesting my presence for a brief compliance consultation later that afternoon. The request seemed ordinary enough. Meetings with Human Resources happened frequently in my position. Still, something about the timing unsettled me. 2 hours later, I walked into a small conference room where our Human Resources Director, Melissa Grant, greeted me with her usual professional smile. She thanked me for coming and explained that someone had anonymously reported concerns about inappropriate workplace discussions involving employees within our department. She carefully emphasized that no formal complaint had been filed and that the company simply wanted to ensure everyone felt comfortable at work. Her questions remained general. Had I witnessed harassment? Had I noticed conflicts between employees? Was anyone being excluded or treated unfairly? I answered truthfully. No. Every response I gave was accurate. I had seen no harassment, no discrimination, and no inappropriate conduct. The meeting ended after only 15 minutes. As I stood to leave, Melissa offered one final comment. Sometimes rumors grow faster than facts. If you notice anyone becoming isolated because of gossip, please let us know immediately. I nodded before leaving, but those words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Someone had already contacted Human Resources. The situation had quietly moved beyond harmless speculation. That evening, I found Noah sitting alone in the office cafe, long after most employees had gone home. He immediately recognized something was different from my expression. "What happened?" he asked. I sat across from him and told him everything Melissa had said, leaving out nothing. He listened silently, his fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since stopped steaming. When I finished, he looked down at the table. "I should leave." The words came so softly they almost disappeared. "What?" "I should resign before this becomes a problem for everyone." I stared at him in disbelief. "You have done absolutely nothing wrong." He gave a tired smile that carried years of disappointment. "That has never mattered before." His answer broke something inside me. For the first time, I realized the weight he had been carrying long before we ever met. This was not simply fear of losing a job. It was the expectation that eventually every place would become another place where he no longer belonged. I leaned forward and spoke more firmly than I intended. "Listen to me. You earned your position here. Your work speaks for itself. If anyone tries to make you believe otherwise, they are wrong. You are not leaving because of rumors." Noah looked into my eyes for several seconds without saying anything. Finally, he whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I searched for an answer that made sense. At first I thought it was loyalty. Then I thought it was friendship. But neither word felt complete anymore. Because everyone deserves at least one person who stays when life becomes difficult. I replied honestly. His eyes shimmered with emotion before he quickly looked away. We left the building together a few minutes later. Snow had melted, replaced by a cold winter rain that reflected the city lights across wet sidewalks. We walked in comfortable silence until we reached the train station. Just before saying goodbye, Noah unexpectedly reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small folded photograph. It showed two teenage boys standing beside a fishing dock somewhere in rural Colorado. One of them was obviously a much younger Noah. The other smiled with an arm around his shoulder. "My older brother," Noah explained quietly. "He was the first person I ever told." I looked at the photograph again. "What happened?" Noah's smile faded. He stood by me. The rest of the family did not. He passed away 3 years later in a car accident. He gently took the photograph back before carefully returning it to his wallet. Sometimes I think he was the last person who ever really saw me. Without thinking, I answered, "You are wrong." Noah looked at me, surprised. "I see you." Neither of us spoke another word after that. We simply stood beneath the station lights as trains came and went around us, unaware that someone inside the parked car across the street had quietly lifted a phone, taken a photograph of the two of us together, and immediately sent it to an unknown recipient with a single message beneath it. "I think the rumor is true." I did not know that photograph existed. If I had, I might have understood why the atmosphere at work felt completely different the following Monday morning. The moment I stepped onto our floor, conversations became strangely careful. People still smiled, still greeted one another, still discussed deadlines and client meetings, but an invisible tension hung over everything. It felt like entering a room where everyone had agreed not to mention the obvious. Noah noticed it too. As we passed each other near the coffee machine, he gave me a small smile that failed to reach his eyes. Neither of us said anything. We both hoped we were imagining it. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel Mercer appeared beside my desk, carrying a folder. "Do you have a minute?" he asked politely. His voice sounded perfectly normal, yet something told me this conversation had nothing to do with work. We stepped into an empty meeting room overlooking the city. Daniel closed the door, but remained standing. For several seconds, he simply looked out the window before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said. I frowned slightly. "For what?" "For not saying something sooner." He sighed quietly. "I know what people are whispering about Noah." I remained silent, careful not to reveal anything. Daniel continued. "When we worked together in Denver, rumors destroyed his reputation long before anyone actually knew him. Most of what people believed was completely false." I finally asked the question that mattered. "Did you tell anyone here?" Daniel turned toward me immediately. "No, absolutely not." His answer came so quickly that I believed him. "Then how did this start?" He shook his head. "I wish I knew." He hesitated before adding, "Someone sent me a photograph yesterday." My heartbeat slowed for a moment. "What photograph?" Daniel reached in his phone, but stopped before opening it. "You and Noah standing together outside Union Station. Nothing inappropriate. Just the two of you talking." He looked directly into my eyes. The message underneath asked whether I could confirm what people were beginning to suspect. I felt my stomach tighten. Someone was collecting evidence where none actually existed. Daniel quietly locked his phone again. I deleted it. "What?" He smiled faintly. "Because another person's private life is not my business." Relief mixed with concern. Whoever had taken that picture wanted confirmation, not truth. Before leaving the room, Daniel placed a hand on the back of a chair and said something I never forgot. People who are determined to believe a story rarely wait for proof. That afternoon, the company announced an unexpected restructuring project. Several employees from different departments would work together for the next month on a major client audit. Noah and I were assigned to the same project team, along with Daniel and 4 other coworkers. Under ordinary circumstances, I would have welcomed the opportunity. Instead, it felt as though every interaction between Noah and me would now happen beneath a microscope. During the first project meeting, our manager distributed responsibilities while everyone reviewed schedules. Noah focused entirely on his notes, speaking only when necessary. I intentionally treated him exactly as I treated everyone else. Professional, respectful, ordinary. If anyone expected dramatic behavior, they were going to be disappointed. As the days passed, the project demanded longer hours. We often remained in the office until well after sunset, reviewing financial records and preparing compliance reports. One evening, nearly everyone had gone home except Noah and me. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. "Do you ever wish life came with an instruction manual?" he asked with a quiet laugh. I smiled. "Only on Mondays." For the first time in weeks, he genuinely laughed. It was a small sound, but hearing it reminded me of the man I had met months earlier before fear had slowly reclaimed its place in his life. "Thank you," he said after a moment, "for pretending everything is normal." I looked at him across the conference table. "I'm not pretending." He seemed confused. "You are still Noah. The rumors have not changed that." He lowered his eyes, clearly struggling to believe those words. Just then, the conference room door opened unexpectedly. Melissa Grant from Human Resources stepped inside. She looked surprised to find only the 2 of us still working. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked warmly. We both smiled and nodded. Melissa glanced around the room before speaking again. "Actually, I was looking for one of the audit files. Sorry for interrupting." She located the folder she needed and turned toward the door, but before leaving, she paused. "One more thing," she said. "I want both of you to know that if either of you ever feels uncomfortable because of workplace gossip, my door is always open." Her tone carried no accusation, only quiet sincerity. After she left, Noah stared silently at the closed door. "She knows," he whispered. "She knows there are rumors," I corrected gently. "That is different." He nodded, though uncertainty remained written across his face. The following Friday, our project team gathered in the executive conference room to present preliminary findings to senior leadership. The presentation went smoothly until one executive asked Noah an unexpected question about a complex compliance issue. Without hesitation, he explained the entire process with remarkable clarity. By the time he finished, the room fell silent for an entirely different reason. One executive smiled and said, "Excellent analysis, Mr. Brooks. exactly the level of thinking we were hoping to see. Pride appeared across Noah's face before quickly disappearing behind his usual modest smile. As the meeting ended, several senior managers congratulated him personally. Walking back toward our department, I noticed something unexpected. The whispers had not disappeared, but something else had begun replacing them. Respect. Competence had started speaking louder than gossip. For the first time in weeks, it felt as though the tide might finally be turning. Neither of us realized, however, that the anonymous person behind the rumors had already grown frustrated. The gossip had failed to isolate Noah, failed to damage his career, and failed to drive him away. If whispers were not enough, whoever was hiding behind them had already decided the next move would be far more personal. The anonymous message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Noah found it waiting in his company email before he had even finished his first cup of coffee. There was no greeting, no signature, only a single sentence. Some truths always catch up with people who run. He stared at the screen without moving. By the time I walked over to ask whether he wanted breakfast from the cafe downstairs, he had already closed the message. Even so, I immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look like you have not slept," I said. He forced a smile that fooled absolutely no one. "Just a strange email. Spam." He hesitated. "I wish it were." He quietly forwarded the message to me. After reading it once, I checked the sender information, but the address had obviously been created only to hide the person's identity. There was nothing useful to trace. "Have you shown this to human resources?" I asked. Noah slowly shook his head. "It is only one sentence. It is still intimidation." He looked out the conference room window toward the busy streets below. "If I report every anonymous message, people will only wonder why someone would send them in the first place." I understood his concern, but remaining silent no longer felt like protection. Whoever was behind this had moved beyond gossip. They wanted Noah to feel watched. That afternoon, I scheduled a private meeting with Melissa Grant. I showed her the forwarded email without mentioning anything Noah had shared with me months earlier. Melissa read it carefully before placing the printed copy into a confidential folder. "We take anonymous harassment seriously," she assured me. "Our information security team will examine the source. In the meantime, neither of you should respond if more messages arrive." Her calm professionalism offered some reassurance, yet I could tell she understood the situation was becoming more deliberate. As I returned to my desk, Daniel Mercer stopped me near the elevators. "Melissa called me in this morning," he admitted quietly. "She asked whether I had received unusual messages too." "Have you?" I asked. Daniel nodded once. "Someone wanted to know whether Noah had ever been involved in a scandal back in Denver." He folded his arms and sighed. "I told them exactly what I told you. There was no scandal. There was gossip created by people who confuse someone's personal life with their professional character." For the first time since meeting Daniel, I realized how much he regretted not defending Noah years earlier. "I should have spoken up then," he admitted. "Maybe none of this would be happening now." "You are speaking up now," I replied. "That matters." He gave a small, grateful nod before returning to work. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming more isolated, Noah slowly found quiet support from people he had never expected. Emily from accounting invited him to join a volunteer event the company sponsored every month. Marcus from information technology began eating lunch with us after discovering Noah shared his interest in restoring vintage cameras. Even our usually reserved department manager started asking Noah to lead portions of important client presentations because of his attention to detail. It was not dramatic. Nobody made speeches. Nobody announced anything publicly. People simply treated him with the respect he had always earned. Watching that transformation reminded me how easily kindness could spread when given the opportunity. One Friday evening, after another long week, Noah suggested we walk through Millennium Park before heading home. The winter air had begun softening into the first hints of spring, and families filled the sidewalks despite the cool breeze. We sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline while musicians performed nearby. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "Almost resigned 3 different times this month." I looked at him in surprise. "You never told me." He smiled faintly. Because every time I thought about it, I remembered something you said. What was that? You earned your place here. He laughed quietly. It sounded simple when you said it, but I kept repeating those words every morning before walking into the office. I felt unexpectedly emotional hearing them repeated back to me. You never needed my permission to belong, Noah. He looked at the skyline before answering. Maybe not, but sometimes people borrow someone else's confidence until they find their own. His words stayed with me long after they were spoken. I realized our friendship had quietly become something neither of us was ready to define. There was trust. There was admiration. There was an unspoken affection growing carefully between us, protected not by fear anymore, but by patience. Just as the sun disappeared behind the buildings, Noah reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a small envelope. What is this? I asked. Open it later. Should I be worried? He laughed for real this time. No, I promise. When I arrived home that evening, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was only 2 pages long, but every sentence came straight from the heart. Noah thanked me for seeing him as a complete person instead of a secret to be managed or a problem to be solved. He wrote that meeting me had slowly taught him the difference between being tolerated and being accepted. Near the end of the letter, one sentence caught my breath completely. No matter what happens next, you helped me believe that my future could be larger than my fear. I read those words 3 times before carefully folding the letter and placing it back inside the envelope. At that exact moment, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed Melissa Grant. I answered immediately. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear urgency beneath it. Ethan, she said, our security team found something about the anonymous emails. We need to speak with you and Noah first thing tomorrow morning. We finally know where the messages came from, but I do not think either of you is prepared for who sent them. I arrived at the office before sunrise the next morning with Noah's letter still folded neatly inside my coat pocket. The city streets were unusually quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself hoping that whatever Melissa had discovered would finally bring an end to the uncertainty that had been following us for months. Noah was already waiting outside the Human Resources office when I arrived. He looked tired but composed, offering a small smile that revealed equal parts curiosity and concern. Do you think this is finally over? He asked. I wanted to answer with confidence, but honesty felt more appropriate. I think we are finally going to learn the truth. Melissa welcomed us into the conference room with the company's information security manager seated beside her. Several printed documents rested neatly on the table. Melissa waited until the door closed before speaking. First, I want both of you to know that neither of you has violated any company policy. This meeting is not disciplinary. Noah quietly released a breath he had obviously been holding. The security manager slid one document across the table. We traced the anonymous email accounts through several login records. Whoever created them attempted to hide their identity, but they made one mistake. One of the accounts was briefly accessed through a personal internet connection instead of a public network. He paused before continuing. The connection belongs to someone with no relationship to this company. Noah frowned slightly. Then who is it? Melissa answered gently. A man named Ryan Brooks. The room fell completely silent. Noah stared at the printed page as though he no longer recognized the words. His voice barely rose above a whisper. My cousin. Neither Melissa nor I interrupted. Noah slowly leaned back in his chair, disbelief replacing confusion. That does not make any sense. Melissa spoke carefully. According to our investigation, Ryan also contacted former co-workers from Denver, searched public employee directories, and attempted to verify personal information about you through several anonymous accounts. Noah covered his face with one hand. I have not spoken to him in almost 4 years. After several quiet moments, he lowered his hand and looked toward me. When I came out to part of my family, Ryan told everyone before I had the chance. He said he was trying to protect the family from rumors. After that, everything fell apart. His words were calm, but I could hear the old pain beneath them. The security manager continued. We have already blocked further contact through company systems. Since the messages originated outside the organization, There is little more we can do internally unless additional contact occurs. However, we wanted you to know the truth rather than leave you wondering. Melissa added one final thought before the meeting ended. Whatever happened before you joined this company, it does not define who you are here. Those words lingered with us long after we left the room. Noah remained unusually quiet throughout the morning. Around lunchtime, I suggested we step outside for fresh air. We walked several blocks without speaking until we reached the river walk where our friendship had quietly changed months earlier. The water flowed steadily beneath the bridges, unchanged by everything that had happened around it. Finally, Noah stopped walking. I kept believing someone at work wanted to destroy my life again, he admitted. I never imagined it was someone who already had. I stood beside him, allowing the silence to exist without trying to fill it. After a while, he smiled sadly. You know what hurts the most? I shook my head. Ryan always said he cared about me. He honestly believed exposing me would somehow fix me. I looked toward the river before answering. Some people confuse control with love. Noah nodded slowly, and some people mistake silence for kindness. We both understood exactly what he meant. For months, I had believed protecting his secret meant carrying it alone. Yet keeping everything hidden had also allowed fear to keep growing between us. That realization settled heavily. In my mind, a week later, the company hosted its annual leadership development seminar. Employees from every department gathered for workshops focused on communication, trust, and workplace culture. During one discussion session, participants were invited to share experiences about moments when another person's support had changed their professional lives. Volunteers spoke about mentors, teachers, and former managers. Then, unexpectedly, Noah raised his hand. The room became completely quiet as he stood. He never mentioned his personal history. He never discussed rumors or anonymous messages. Instead, he spoke about something much simpler. Sometimes the greatest gift another person gives you is not advice, he said calmly. Sometimes it is consistency. It is showing up every day and treating someone with the same respect, whether life is easy or difficult. That kind of kindness changes people more than they realize. As he returned to his seat, spontaneous applause filled the room. I noticed Daniel smiling proudly from across the audience. Melissa quietly wiped away a tear before returning to her notes. Noah looked embarrassed by the attention, but I could also see something new in his expression. Confidence. Not borrowed confidence. His own. That evening, after everyone else had left, we returned to the office to collect our belongings. As we reached the elevators, Noah stopped me. Can I ask you something? Of course. He hesitated only briefly. The night I told you who I was beside this river, were you ever afraid people would assume something about you too? I smiled honestly. Yes. He looked surprised. Then why did you stay? I thought about the question for several seconds before answering. Because losing a friendship built on honesty would have been far worse than living with someone else's assumptions. Noah's eyes softened. You really mean that? Every word. The elevator doors opened, but neither of us stepped inside immediately. For the first time since we had met, there was no fear standing between us. Only the quiet possibility that the truth we had spent so long protecting had already changed both of us in ways neither of us fully understood. Neither of us noticed the small package resting on Noah's desk upstairs, delivered anonymously just before the office closed. Inside waited a weathered leather journal addressed in familiar handwriting, along with a note containing only 6 words. You deserve to know everything now. For several long minutes, neither of us touched the package. It sat quietly on Noah's desk beneath the warm glow of the office lights. Ordinary in appearance, yet somehow heavier than anything either of us had carried during the past few months. Noah slowly picked it up and turned it over in his hands. There was no return address, only his name, written in handwriting he recognized immediately. His expression changed before he spoke a single word. It is my brother's handwriting, he whispered. I looked at him carefully. You are sure? He nodded without hesitation. I would recognize it anywhere. We carried the package into an empty conference room where the evening silence offered a sense of privacy neither of us wanted to interrupt. Noah carefully untied the worn leather cord wrapped around the journal. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the first page. Inside, a short handwritten note rested between the cover and the opening chapter. It read, "If you are reading this, someone finally believed you deserve the truth instead of protection. I hope you have already met people who remind you that love should never require hiding who you are." Noah closed his eyes for several seconds before quietly placing the note back inside. "My brother always wrote letters instead of sending text messages," he said with a faint smile. He believed handwritten words lasted longer. We spent the next hour reading together. The journal was not a diary in the traditional sense. Instead, it contained reflections, memories, and advice written over several years. His brother described growing up together, watching Noah slowly become quieter whenever family conversations drifted toward relationships and expectations. He admitted that he had recognized Noah's fear long before Noah ever found the courage to speak about it. One passage stopped both of us completely. "The hardest part is not watching someone reject you. The hardest part is watching someone you love reject themselves because they believe it will make everyone else's life easier." Noah quietly lowered the journal onto the table. Tears rested in his eyes, but this time they were not born from grief alone. They carried relief as well. "He knew," Noah said softly. "He knew exactly what I was going through." I nodded. "It sounds like he also knew exactly who you were." Noah smiled through the emotion. He always did. Several pages later, another folded envelope slipped from between the journal pages. Unlike the first note, this one had never been opened. Across the front, his brother had written only 2 words, "For later." Noah carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting remained steady and familiar. "If life ever convinces you that protecting everyone else matters more than telling the truth, remember this. Secrets may keep people comfortable for a little while, but honesty gives them the chance to love the real person standing in front of them. Give people that chance. Some will disappoint you. Others will surprise you. Build your future around the second group." Neither of us spoke after reading those words. The room felt completely still, as though the years separating Noah from his brother had quietly disappeared for just a moment. Before leaving the office, Noah carefully returned every page to the journal. "How did this get here?" he asked. The question lingered between us. The following afternoon, the answer arrived unexpectedly. Melissa stopped by our department and asked whether Noah had a few minutes. This time the meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. When he returned, his expression looked calmer than it had in weeks. "Melissa found out who delivered the journal," he explained. "A local attorney." I looked surprised. "An attorney?" Noah nodded. "My brother prepared several personal letters before he passed away. He left instructions that they should only be delivered if someone requested them, or if enough time had passed for the family situation to settle." He smiled gently. "The attorney said he recently learned I had been living in Chicago and decided it was finally the right moment." I felt something inside me relax. The journal had not arrived because someone wanted to reopen old wounds. It had arrived because someone had honored a promise made years earlier. Over the next several days, Noah seemed different. The cautious hesitation that had followed him since the day we met slowly disappeared. He contributed ideas confidently during meetings, accepted compliments without immediately dismissing them, and even volunteered to mentor one of the company's newest employees. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was quieter than that. He simply stopped apologizing for existing. One evening, after finishing another successful client presentation, Daniel invited both of us to dinner. Over pizza at a small neighborhood restaurant, he finally spoke about Denver in greater detail. "I have carried something for a long time," Daniel admitted. "When the rumors started back then, I knew they were unfair. I told myself it was none of my business. Staying silent felt easier." Noah listened without interrupting. Daniel continued, "Looking back, silence helped the wrong people. I cannot change what happened, but I wanted you to know I am sorry." Noah looked at him for several thoughtful seconds before smiling warmly. "Thank you for saying it." Daniel looked relieved. "You are not angry?" Noah gently shook his head. "I spent too many years hoping the past would become different. I would rather spend the next years building something better. As we walked outside after dinner, the first warm breeze of spring moved through the streets of Chicago. Noah laughed quietly. You know what is strange? What? I asked. For the first time in years, I'm actually excited about tomorrow. I smiled. That sounds like progress. He looked at me with an expression that carried both gratitude and something deeper that neither of us had yet put into words. No, he said softly. It sounds like freedom. At that moment, I realized the greatest change in our lives had never been the rumors, the anonymous messages, or even the secrets themselves. The greatest change had happened the day Noah stopped believing his future would always be controlled by his past. Neither of us knew it yet, but one final conversation still waited ahead of us, and it would ask both of us a question neither could avoid any longer. After everything we had survived together, what did we truly mean to each other? The weeks that followed felt lighter than anything either of us had experienced since the day we met. The office no longer seemed divided by whispers or unanswered questions. Projects continued, deadlines arrived as always, and life gradually settled into a rhythm that felt genuine instead of fragile. Noah no longer looked over his shoulder whenever an unfamiliar email appeared in his inbox. He greeted new employees with the same easy smile that had first caught my attention months earlier. And for the first time since coming to Chicago, he seemed to believe that this city could truly become home. One Friday afternoon, our department received exciting news. The leadership team announced that the client audit we had completed together had become one of the company's most successful projects of the year. Every member of our team would attend a recognition dinner overlooking Lake Michigan. As congratulations echoed throughout the office, I noticed Noah standing quietly beside the windows, watching the city below. I walked over with 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. You earned this, I said. He smiled before shaking his head. We earned this. I laughed softly, still modest. Still honest, he replied. That evening, the recognition dinner felt completely different from the holiday gathering months earlier. Back then, Noah had entered the ballroom carrying invisible fear. Now he walked through the room with quiet confidence, stopping to greet coworkers who genuinely admired both his professionalism and his kindness. Emily introduced him to several executives from another division. Marcus spent 10 minutes convincing everyone that Noah had become the unofficial champion of office trivia competitions. Even Daniel raised a glass during dinner and thanked the entire project team for reminding him that trust always produced better work than suspicion. Watching Noah laugh naturally among friends, I realized something simple, yet profound. Nothing about him had changed. Only the environment around him had. Sometimes acceptance is not about becoming someone new. It is about finally being allowed to remain yourself. After dinner, many of us walked along the lakefront beneath the evening lights. Small groups drifted into separate conversations until, without planning it, Noah and I found ourselves walking alone several yards behind everyone else. The cool spring breeze carried the sound of gentle waves against the shoreline. For several minutes, we enjoyed the silence. Finally, Noah stopped walking. Do you remember the first question I ever asked you beside the river? He said. I nodded immediately. You asked whether I had ever felt like I was pretending to be someone everyone expected. He smiled thoughtfully. I spent years believing the answer to that question would always be yes. He looked toward the water before continuing. Now I think I was asking the wrong question. What is the right one? I asked. He met my eyes with calm certainty. Who makes you feel safe enough to stop pretending? His words settled quietly between us. I knew there was only one honest answer. You did, I admitted. Noah looked surprised. Me? I nodded. When you trusted me with your truth, it forced me to examine my own life. I realized I had been hiding too, not because I was afraid of who you were, but because I was afraid of admitting how important you had become to me. Neither of us looked away. There was no dramatic music, no grand declaration, only complete honesty after months of learning how valuable honesty could be. Noah smiled with the same warmth I had noticed the day we met in the hallway surrounded by scattered papers. I hope that might be true, he said quietly, but I never wanted to assume. I laughed softly. Good thing one of us finally stopped assuming. We continued walking beneath the city lights, our conversation flowing naturally from memories to hopes, from regrets to possibilities. We spoke about traveling through New England during autumn, visiting the small bookstores we had always talked about, and perhaps one day finding a neighborhood where both of us would want to build a life instead of simply passing through it. None of those dreams felt impossible anymore. As we returned toward the others, Daniel glanced in our direction and smiled knowingly before turning back to his conversation. Melissa caught my eye for a brief moment and offered a quiet smile as well, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. Respect had replaced curiosity. Friendship had replaced gossip. Compassion had replaced fear. A few days later, Noah asked whether I would join him on a weekend trip to the small Colorado town where he had grown up. There are a few places I think I'm finally ready to visit again, he explained. I agreed without hesitation. Before leaving the office that Friday, Noah carefully placed his brother's journal into his backpack. He always believed I would eventually find people worth trusting, he said. I think he would have liked you. I smiled. I wish I could have met him. Noah looked out the office window toward the setting sun. In a way, he replied, gently resting his hand over the journal. I think you just did. As we left the building together, I realized that the secret which had once threatened to separate us had instead become the foundation of something stronger than either of us had expected. Yet one final chapter still remained, because some journeys are not completed the moment two people choose each other. They are completed the moment they choose to face the future together, without fear, without hiding, and without allowing the past to decide who they are ever again. 1 year later, I found myself standing in almost the exact place where everything had begun. The Chicago River flowed quietly beneath the evening sky, reflecting thousands of lights that shimmered across the water. People hurried across the bridge after work, each carrying their own stories, their own worries, their own hopes. Life continued as it always had, yet mine no longer resembled the careful routine I once believed would never change. Noah walked beside me with the same calm smile that had slowly become the most familiar part of every day. There was no tension in his shoulders now, no instinctive glance over his shoulder whenever someone called his name, no fear hidden behind carefully chosen words. He had not become a different person. He had simply become free to be the person he had always been. Looking back, I realized that freedom had arrived one honest conversation at a time. The months following our trip to Colorado brought quiet but meaningful changes. Noah reconnected with relatives who had never truly stopped caring about him, but had allowed years of silence to grow between them. Some relationships healed immediately. Others required patience. A few never recovered at all. Surprisingly, Noah accepted every outcome with remarkable peace. Not everyone will understand, he told me one afternoon while we unpacked boxes in the apartment we had recently decided to share. But I finally understand that I cannot measure my worth by someone else's acceptance. Hearing those words reminded me of the frightened young man who had once believed resignation was easier than facing another rumor. The difference was extraordinary. At work, our lives also continued moving forward. The leadership team promoted Noah to senior compliance consultant after another successful audit cycle. His reputation became defined not by whispers but by integrity, intelligence, and the calm leadership he offered younger employees. Several new hires quietly sought his advice whenever they felt uncertain about fitting into a demanding corporate environment. Noah never asked why they came to him. He simply listened with the same patience that had once been given to him. One afternoon, Emily jokingly referred to him as the unofficial office big brother, and the nickname quietly remained. As for me, I accepted a position leading a newly created ethics initiative focused on strengthening workplace trust and respectful communication. During one company seminar, I stood before a room filled with employees from every department and shared a simple lesson without mentioning names or personal history. Healthy workplaces are built long before problems appear, I said. They are built every time someone chooses curiosity over assumptions, compassion over gossip, and honesty over fear. The applause that followed felt meaningful, Not because people agreed with my words, but because I knew exactly where those words had come from. They'd been earned. A few weeks later, Daniel invited both of us to lunch. As we walked through a neighborhood park afterward, he smiled and shook his head. You know, he said, if someone had told me a year ago that the two of you would completely change how this company talks about inclusion and respect, I would never have believed it. Noah laughed. Neither would I. Daniel looked at both of us thoughtfully. Sometimes people think courage means making the loudest statement in the room. I think courage is showing up every day without letting fear decide who you become. We thanked him, knowing he'd changed too. His willingness to speak when it mattered had become part of all our stories. That autumn, Noah and I returned to the small lakeside bench where we had once opened his brother's journal together. The journal rested between us again, its pages now worn from being read many times. Noah carefully opened to the final page, where his brother had written one last sentence years before. If this journal ever reaches you, I hope you have discovered that truth does not take love away. It reveals where love has been waiting all along. Noah closed the book slowly before looking at me. For years, I thought telling the truth would cost me everything. I gently took his hand. Instead, he smiled, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and quiet joy. Instead, it led me here. We remained there until the sun disappeared beyond the skyline, saying very little because no long speech could improve upon the peace of simply sharing the moment. As we finally stood to leave, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. I had believed I covered up his truth because I wanted to protect him. In reality, both of us had been protecting ourselves from the possibility that honesty might completely reshape our lives. It did, not through dramatic confrontations or impossible miracles, but through ordinary acts of trust repeated every single day. One conversation, one friendship, one decision to stay, one choice to believe another person deserved dignity exactly as they were. Those small moments quietly transformed everything. If someone asked me today whether I would make the same choices again, my answer is simple. I would still stand beside Noah on that cold evening by the river. I would still listen before speaking. I would still choose compassion over comfort. The only thing I would change is this. I would tell him much sooner that no truth worth living should ever have to be carried alone. Because love does not begin when two people finally stop hiding from each other. Love begins the moment they discover they no longer have to hide from themselves. And that was the moment both of our lives truly began.